Hi, I'm Azelle from the Upcoming. It's lovely to speak to you all today about your film, documentary, D is for Distance. Could you start by telling me a little bit about what it is and what sparked you wanting to bring the story to screen?
Louis, our son became ill 9 years ago now, actually, 2016, with seizures and epilepsy. Chris and I have made many films together and over the years. And in fact, Louis was in a film we made in 2009 when he was 6. We didn't think we were going to make a film about this until much, much later. Years went by when his seizures were uncontrolled and he just became iller and iller and iller. And in the end, I had to take him to the Netherlands for treatment because we were told by Great Ormond Street that there was no more they can do. He'd never be seizure-free. It was really, and that no one really could understand why he was so ill, having been completely well before he was 12, which is very unusual. And I discovered through those years that, how very little is known about epilepsy in the brain, and treatment is all guesswork. You just kind of try one drug and then another, and if those drugs don't work, it's unlikely any others will. So I took him to Netherlands for medical cannabis. After I got to know Hannah Deacon, who'd actually campaigned to get it legalised for her son, Alfie Dingley, who became a huge support to me. And I went to the Netherlands not even thinking it would work. But once we got him off the drugs that had been prescribed, which turned out to be causing seizures and stopping him from processing new memories, then he became seizure-free on medical cannabis. And when we came back to the UK, Louis was offered he'd missed out on all his secondary education. And he was then cognitively well again. And he'd already carried on painting and drawing always throughout his illness. However, ill he was in bed. And he got offered a place at art school in London. So we came home, tried to get a prescription for medical cannabis here, but we can only get private prescriptions, which cost a fortune. So we then had to do some crowdfunding. And that's when we made a 10-minute film about the Louis and epilepsy, and that kind of turned into this longer, bigger film eventually.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking very quickly about how the film was made, because we didn't do any pitches. I was never asked the dreaded question, what are we going to see? We made really no formal applications to anyone, but through the trust of a very small group of people, we were told, yeah, go ahead. I didn't have to write a script. And initially it was through being able to go back to a woman at ZDF and RT, German and French television, with whom we'd worked before. And I said, look, we've done this very, very little crowdfunding films, 10 minutes, da-di-da. Maybe there's something that you'd be interested in. Now, she was about to retire. And I think she was demob happy because she came back and said, yeah, I'll give you the money. And through that, we then went to an old friend of mine in Helsinki. And I said, look, we need a production company. And they came in. And really, the film got made with none of that usual level of pitching and import tuning and all the rest of it, and people saying this or that. And we wouldn't have had the energy to do that anyway. So we were very, very lucky. So that was the good side of it.
And Louis, obviously, the subject of the film is you. So this must have been quite a scary journey for you, suddenly having seizures. And what has that been like for you? And how are you managing it now? And what does that feel like to have a spotlight on you?
Yeah, it's weird having the spotlight on me. I mean, epilepsy is such a strange journey. My journey with epilepsy has been such a strange journey because of the extremity of how bad my epilepsy was, and it developing so late makes it quite unique. It's just very rare for it to be as bad as it was so late in life, because I started having seizures when I was 12, turning 13, and from there on out. And it was the drugs causing the seizures, but it's very rare for someone to be cognitive after having as many seizures as I did. I'm in quite a unique position that even with other people with epilepsy, I know people have worse epilepsy than me. I know people, everyone's epilepsy is unique. So it's quite hard to fully relate to even other people that have epilepsy. I know other people with epilepsy feel the same. In terms of the positioning of the film and time, I can't remember much during my time having seizures. So I was incognitive for a portion of that time, and my memory was greatly affected, and that in itself is this kind of sort of trauma that itself is quite strange. And I've always been very comfortable speaking about my epilepsy. I've always been very open about it because it was kind of quite therapeutic. I mean, it's kind of other people deal with it in other ways. There are a lot of people that I know are quite embarrassed about having epilepsy. It's quite stigmatized, so I understand why. I know that it's misunderstood. I know that there's not many people speaking for epilepsy or about epilepsy. I was very scared to speak about it. I was very scared to do this film. There's footage of me having seizures in the film. It's scary, but I felt it was important. I felt it was something I wanted to do. It was something I wanted to raise awareness about. I didn't want it to be a sob story. I didn't want it to be a pity story. It was just about, I guess, raising awareness for epilepsy, showing what epilepsy is. And it did force me to kind of reach a level of a healthy detachment with the epilepsy that I hadn't really realized I'd reached because I felt so comfortable speaking about it. I kind of felt like I had reached a level of stability that I really hadn't yet. And it kind of forced me to confront it. It forced me to kind of stop making it my whole identity. And for a while it was like, it's hard to avoid that when it takes up your life for however many years. I'd lived a few years seizure free. I'm almost 5 years seizure free now, and eventually you just need to start, I guess, it's just let go. And that is hard, but I think it helped me let go. And I do think there's some part of me that's still traumatized, but it's definitely it's helped along that way. And yeah.
Was it quite an emotional journey for you, all working on this together? Because, you know, it's quite scary, I guess, when you've had everything, a normal upbringing, everything's fine, and then this shakes up the family unit, and it's something you've all got to deal with. Did it feel quite therapeutic and a great journey to do together to have this film put on screen?
I think it was definitely therapeutic. You know, after 2 years, the first 2 years of Louis' uncontrolled seizures, I just couldn't look at old family photos or footage of him anymore at all. I mean, you just couldn't, because I was told before we went to the Netherlands, I was told to grieve for the child he once was. And so looking at those old photos felt like I was grieving for someone who was completely lost. And so the film, we use a lot of childhood photos and film footage, so it helped to be able to look at that again. And actually using the seizure footage as well, that I'd been asked to film by the doctors, to film his seizures so they could help with the diagnosis, because he had so many different types of seizures. And it kind of helped me able to use them in a creative way. I mean, I've always been a film editor, so being able to actually do something that I've always loved editing, and be able to use this in a creative way, I think is quite healing as well, in a way. And also, I just wanted people to understand more about what it's like as a mother to see your child having seizures like this. So I got to know lots of other mothers now with children with very severe epilepsy. Seizures are not controlled, and I know what it's like for them to live with this. And I want the world to understand it a bit more. There's so much stigma surrounding epilepsy still. For those reasons, not enough research is done, as well. There's hardly any money spent on epilepsy research. 30% of children with epilepsy have drug-resistant epilepsy, and that has not changed in 50 years because there's not the research, and this is what we need, especially into genetic epilepsy, which is the probable cause of Louis. And we just need that research funded now.
For 4 years, while Louis was really, really ill, and in a way it was like a mystery story. You didn't know what the answer was. You didn't know whose fault it was. You didn't know whether it was the epilepsy itself or whether... And I think it was Louis who was the first one to say, well, I think it's the medication. In that respect, it was a really, really tough journey. And I think the film acted as a kind of interlude, because we had to work out how to construct something creative, because we were all adamant that it shouldn't just be a really depressing film about a really depressing event. And so a lot of creative energy went into that. And the film, in a way, acted as an interlude between two periods. There was the period when Louis was having his epilepsy, which was, sort of ghastly in terms of not knowing, not being able to understand. And then, happy ending. He gets his happy ending. He stops having seizures. Great. Let's all, move on with our lives. But no, you then enter 4 years of nightmare, Kafka bureaucracy dealing with the NHS. And that has been, if anything, even more of a nightmare, the aftermath, because you're dealing with essentially a very cold bureaucratic system. And I've learned more, in a way, about life from the second period than I did from the first period.
I wouldn't say it was more traumatic at all, but I've been really shocked at how we know Louis' doctors know he needs to stay on his medication to stay well, and yet they can't get the funding, the NHS funding, and it would cost the NHS much more for him to be having uncontrolled seizures again. So that's the battle that we still is ongoing, really.
I do think that it's brought us closer together making the film, though. So yeah.
You answered the question. Good luck with the film. Look forward to seeing it and it coming to screen for viewers. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you.